Let's begin with a prayer. Glory be to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now at the hour of our death. Amen.
Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us. Saints Sarkis and Bacchus, pray for us. In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. I would ask everybody to please mute yourselves. If you have a question, then unmute so we won't have a lot of background noise. So if everybody would mute themselves. Good. Okay. Now, these 9 sessions, my approach to this issue would be, we're going to answer a question in each of the 9 sessions. We're just going to pose one single question that you might hear, and then I will try to give you an answer to that question. Now, this first lecture or presentation might appear to be like a history course, but what I found is that quite often, well, the Latins know nothing about us. And the Eastern Catholics, we tend to know our own church. We don't know the origins and where the other churches are situated and that kind of thing. We only know our own churches. So what I'm going to try to do is to give a very large presentation, a broad presentation on what is an Eastern church. And the approach, the methodology is going to be this. First, we're going to talk about the expansion of the gospel message, how the gospel message went from Jerusalem to all over the world. And after expansion, we're going to talk about divisions that arose. And after that, first one is expansion, second is division, the third is reunification, partial reunification. And that's where most of the Eastern Catholic churches came from, not the Maronites. We are the unique exception. We are the unique exception. But all of the other Eastern Catholic churches, they don't like to hear it, but really they are consequences of the Tridentine reform. And I'll get into that in a few moments. So, what is an Eastern Catholic Church? First of all, let's talk about unity and diversity. These two notions, unity and diversity, are not opposites. We're not talking about uniformity, we're talking about unity. Now, and at the very beginning, the church was one. It was united. But from 70 AD on, the church was not uniform. It was one, but very, very diverse. In his last earthly night, on the last earthly night of his life, Jesus was in Gethsemane. And at that moment, we hear in the Gospel of John, God, the Son, praying to God the Father. A very inspirational moment. And what's he praying for? What is the one thing is on his mind on the last night of his life? That we be one. I am not asking on behalf of them alone, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, as you, Father, are in me and I am you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe you sent me. We need to be one in order for the world to accept our message. Our divisiveness, our division is counterproductive. We cannot give a witness to the world to unify humanity if we ourselves are divided. Now, Jesus was praying that we be one. If you go to a dictionary of Christian churches today, you will find that there are now over 31,000 communities, all taking the name of Christian and all claiming to be the true followers of Jesus. The others got it wrong. Now, I said that the church was unified. It was one. I also said it was diverse. Diversity is not a negative quality. Diversity is not a negative quality. Actually, it's quite positive because it allows and indicates that the gospel message can be taken all over the world, planted in different places, flourish, grow up in a unique form, but still reflect the gospel. If you will recall, if you take the example, if you took French grapevines and took them to California or to upstate New York and planted them, same vine, different soil, the taste of the grape is going to be different, but it is on the same vine. Now, Charles Darwin, in the middle of the 19th century, went on a ship ride, a cruise, a journey for 5 years on the Beagle. And he went to the Galapagos Islands. And he went to these islands, and what he did notice was, why on different islands are there the same plants? Why on different islands are there similar plants? Why on the same island are there similar? All this diversity, all these questions. How can these plants, what is the relationship between all these plants? We look at the church today, all these churches, the evangelical church, the Protestant church, the Orthodox church, the Oriental Orthodox church, the Latin church. And we ask, well, what is the common denominator here? What is the origin of all these churches? We know, Darwin said there were monkeys involved in people. We know, though, that the church finds its origin in the preaching of the apostles, those 12 apostles. That's our common origin. And from there, it became diverse. Now, as we know, as clerics, we can see the church is quite different in many different places. And even Catholic churches are different. Some people will approach us who are Maronites and say, well, why are you different? Why are you different? And immediately the commonly accepted wisdom is that, well, there were so many fights and divisions, you all broke away from each other. Don't accept that from the Latins, because the Latins experienced the greatest division with Protestantism. So they say we're divisive, they're worse. Okay, so unity and diversity. Diversity doesn't mean division. I'm going to go into a discussion of the expansion of the church, first of all. But before I go into that specifically, I'd like to talk about a few influential factors. Now, we always had the opinion that there were the Christians and the Roman Empire and the Roman soldiers, and the Romans were the enemy, right? That's what we felt. There were the Christians and the Romans. However, one can see in the early church, 6th and 7th century of the church, the popes described the Roman Empire as an act of divine providence that facilitated the spread of the gospel. Let me describe it. I'll give you a good example. St. Paul. St. Paul went from Jerusalem through Turkey, through Greece, through Yugoslavia, the Baltic states, or the Anatolia and all that, and then went over to Rome. One interesting thing about that was he never crossed an international border. One country, he was able to spread the gospel because of the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire facilitated communication. He was able to send a letter from Jerusalem to Rome. Why? Because there were postal services. Well, the first 300 years in the history of the church wasn't very easy. The Romans looked on Christians, like us, Christians. They really didn't distinguish us too much from Jews. They said the Jews and the Christians, it was like they couldn't tell the difference. And we were all kind of outlaws. And in order to be a Christian, if you were a Christian in the first 300 years, you were subject to arrest, torture, death, and loss of property. They could do any of that to you. And then the sea change took place. In 313, Emperor Constantine had a vision, and he saw the cross, and it was written in Greek under the cross, not Latin. He wasn't good in Latin. And it said, "By this sign you will conquer." And he had the soldiers paint crosses on their armor, on their helmets, even on their horses. And they won the battle. With that, Constantine said, Christianity is no longer illegal. It's legal. It's legal to be a Christian. You weren't an outlaw. And with that, things began to change rather quickly. In 320, he founded a new city. It was Byzantium was the old city. It was a little village. He founded a new city, Constantinople. He called it the New Rome. Why did he do that? Well, first of all, he could see what was in the future. The old Rome was going to collapse, and it did in about a century. But then he wanted a capital of the Christian empire that was Christian from its foundations. It was spiritual from its foundations. It wasn't a pagan city like Rome with a Christian veneer. The foundations of Constantinople were Christian. I'll tell you how rapidly things went. Now remember, they're fighting pagan temples and pagan priests, and you know how tricky priests can be. Well, in 313, he lifted the prohibition against Christianity. By 385, that meant at 313, the pagan temples were still legal. By 385, Christianity had become the state religion. 385. Now, that's good and that's bad. Spiritually, it caused a challenge for the church because all of a sudden, if the emperor is Christian and it's not a big deal to be a Christian, it became a very soft religion. It was bourgeois. What happened was, that was when St. Anthony and all of the monastic movement, they moved from the cities where it was comfortable to be a Christian out to lead an ascetic life in the desert. That was hardcore Christianity. That was where you really were a Christian, not soft like everybody else in the suburbs. There was another problem. The state and the church, the interest of both became intertwined. Let me explain. You had all the different heresies coming up, Monophysitism, all these different things came up. Who convoked the ecumenical councils? Not the Pope, not the Patriarch of Constantinople, the Emperor. He didn't want divisions in the church because divisions in the church meant that there would be divisions in society. When they were talking about the two natures of Christ, whether Christ had one or two natures, actually, my brothers, this division, this dispute, was comparable to what we would be arguing about today with regard to sexuality, same-sex marriage, abortion, birth control, how people have very strong opinions about it. If you walked into a Starbucks and you heard two people arguing about whether same-sex marriage should be legalized or whether it's right or wrong, you just keep on going because it would be something you're used to hearing. There in the marketplaces, they would be fighting over whether Jesus had one or two natures. Okay, I brought up some negative points. The positive points of Christianity becoming the state religion are that all of a sudden the church was able to transform from being a movement to being an institution. The mother of Constantine went to the Holy Land. She built the Holy Sepulchre. She built the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. Constantine built the St. Peter's in Rome, Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. All of these magnificent churches were gifts of the state. The state was able to establish libraries, clinics, schools, build churches everywhere. Now, I'm going to, let's see if I can do this. Share a document, okay. Okay. I'm trying. Did I get it yet? No. Okay, you have it in front of you. I don't want to try now. I had it before. I thought I could do it. And I just want to share screen. Maybe. One moment, I'll go to that now. Okay, do you see that now? You see it, good. I take pride in the fact I can do this. Now, you see here, this is the Roman Empire. And you see how far it extended. It was into Egypt, going up clear to the Ireland in the north. Now, or Scotland in the north, in England. Now, you see that one is pink, one is green. In 395, Diocletian divided the empire to the Eastern Roman Empire and to the Western Roman Empire. Now, this looks like, okay, just that's not a big deal because we got so big, we expanded. Actually, what he was doing was the Western Roman Empire was on the verge of collapse. In 410, barbarians started coming in to the green area, the Western Roman Empire, and in 476, Rome, the last emperor of the Roman Empire, died. Romulus was his name, and he died. So by 476, you have all of this area really separated, and it's collapsing. It's no longer Roman, it's run by barbarians. Now, our churches all of our churches, the Eastern churches, came from the Eastern Roman Empire. Our origins, that's why we use the word Eastern, are in the Eastern Roman Empire. Now, I'm going to talk about centers of evangelization. This is the question that you can answer when people say, why are you so different? Why do you say Mass differently? Well, because we went from Jerusalem, and the message, the gospel message, spread east and west. East, it went into India. By the way, Marco Polo, when he went in the 12th century to China, and he started talking about the Our Father, some scholars said, we know that, we've heard of that. Missionaries had gotten as far as China. Okay, we're going to talk about this area right here for the time being. And what I'm going to talk about now is the centers of evangelization. What did I say was the first center? Who was the common denominator of all Christians? The apostles. Where were they? In Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is a city. It's really in the middle of nowhere. It's that part of the region that didn't get any oil. It wasn't on any major trading routes. It's kind of like, Deacon Peter, forgive me, it's kind of like Utica. You don't stop by, you don't stop by when you're going through Utica. You got to go there you got to want to go there to pass through it. Now, or like Uniontown. Now, let's talk about Jerusalem itself. Jerusalem is a city revered by three religions. The first one is Judaism. At the temple site, that is traditionally for the Jews where Abraham began the sacrifice of Isaac. That is where they built the temple, where Solomon built the temple. That is where David established the kingdom. For us Christians, Jerusalem is the site of the crucifixion, the resurrection, Pentecost, all happened in Jerusalem. Now, for the Muslims hold that Muhammad preached first of all to the prophets on the Temple Mount, and then ascended to heaven and visited heaven. When Islam first started and they had a direction to pray in, they didn't pray first to Mecca, they prayed to Jerusalem first of all. So we have three religions all holding this place to be holy. I'd like to read to you a passage though. And when Jesus drew near and saw Jerusalem, he wept over it, saying, would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you from every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children with you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation. Jesus was looking at Jerusalem, looking at the temple, and saying it's going to get torn down. Now, the temple was rather new at the time because this was a rebuilt temple. It was only about 50 years old. It was true. His prediction was true. He was saying this in 33 AD. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. Now, you see, this is from the Arch of Titus in Rome, this frieze. And you see them carrying the loot from the temple, the plates, the menorah, from the temple, carrying them through the streets of Rome. You can't imagine the devastation that this meant for the Jews, because God had given them the land was taken by the Romans. Now God had built a temple, it was gone, it was destroyed. Again, this was because of riots in Jerusalem. Again, in 135 AD, Jerusalem again was completely destroyed. Any of the holy places were plowed over, and at the temple site where Jesus was crucified and the resurrection took place, they put a temple to Venus. So Jerusalem, by 135 AD, stopped being a city, stopped being a center of evangelization, and the Christians had to go elsewhere. Where did they go? Well, where they went was Antioch, right here. We're all familiar with Antioch. It's in Turkey. A little bit of Turkey goes down here. It's in Turkey. It looks like it could be in Syria. It's in Turkey. Antioch in its day was Washington, New York, and Los Angeles all combined into one. It controlled this entire region of the Orient, a very, very large province, very wealthy, very sophisticated. When Eleanor of Aquitaine went during the Crusades to Antioch, they couldn't get her to go home. She said, "Why would I want to leave these beautiful mosaics and fountains in Antioch and go back to the mud hole of Paris?" So Antioch, they moved from Jerusalem to Antioch. That became the center of evangelization. Now, I'll read you another passage from Acts. Go down here. Then Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. And when he found him, he brought him back to Antioch. So for a full year, they met together with the church and taught large numbers of people. The disciples were first called Christians at Antioch. In those days, some prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. You can see the center of gravity is moving from Jerusalem to Antioch. Now, one thing I want you to take note of here is, who were the key apostles in Antioch? Paul and Peter. Paul and Peter. Take note, you're going to see Peter is the golden thread through all of this. From Antioch, Antioch evangelized Asia. It went to the boundaries of the Roman Empire, north, up into here, and east, as far as China. And in the 13th century, between Antioch and China, there were 13 archdioceses and 200 dioceses. So from these, certain churches arose, the Antiochene churches, the Orthodox Church, the Jacobite Church, which we now can refer to as Oriental Orthodox, the Syriac Catholic Church, which is the counterpart of the Jacobites, the Maronite Church, and an Indian church, the Syro-Malankara Church. And then it went beyond the Roman Empire and really evangelized, first of all, Armenia, which developed its own traditions, quite independent of Antioch, but still had its roots there, and the Assyrian and the Chaldean churches. Now, in dealing with people, can anybody say where Assyria is in modern day? What countries occupy Assyria? Well, it's Iran and Iraq. If someone says, and they come up to you and they say they are Chaldean, you don't ask them if they're Catholic or not. Chaldean designates all that Rites Catholic group. Its Orthodox counterpart are the Assyrians. Now, that's Antioch. We've gone from Jerusalem to Antioch. Now we're going to Alexandria. Alexandria is here, founded in about 300 BC by the generals of Alexander the Great. It was the second largest city in the Mediterranean, second only to Rome. So we've gone from Jerusalem to Antioch, then southwest to Alexandria. Alexandria evangelized East Africa. East Africa. West Africa, this part here, this was all influenced by Rome. So Alexandria went southeast. And who evangelized it first? His name was John Mark. In fact, the church identifies itself as the evangelization of Mark. Who was Mark? A disciple of Peter. In fact, he was with Peter when he died in Rome. Peter referred to him as my son Mark. And if you've been in Rome, they call the one monument the wedding cake, the Victor Emmanuel Monument. If you're looking at that, you're facing it, up to the right is where Mark would have written his gospel, the Gospel of Mark, before going down into Africa. Mark evangelized Africa, or Alexandria evangelized Africa. So we have the Coptic Catholic and Orthodox churches. We have the Ethiopian churches, Catholic and Orthodox, and we have the Eritrean churches, Catholic and Orthodox. I know I'm going fast, but I only got an hour. How are we doing on time? We're not doing bad. Remember now, we're talking about the expansion of the gospel message and how the churches arose in different places. We saw how, and also keep in mind, there was Peter in Jerusalem, Peter in Antioch, Peter in Alexandria. Now, it really wasn't a major city at the time of Jesus, but as I said, Constantine wanted to found a city that was purely Christian and founded what was called the New Rome, or Constantinople. And he was very smart when he did it. Look, it was the bridge between Europe and Asia, and it still is. If you go one side, you go east, you go into Asia, and the other part of Istanbul is now in Europe. So he built Byzantium here, and his followers very wisely said, we don't want to call it the New Rome. We want to call it Constantinople. The term Byzantines, by the way, just as an aside, Byzantines, we call them Byzantines, everybody in this part of the empire, up in here. We call them Byzantines. That is a name that was assigned to them in the 16th century. What did they call themselves? They called themselves Romans. They called themselves Romans. Now, traditionally, because he died in the region, Constantinople is identified with Andrew. Andrew. Who's Andrew? The elder brother of Peter. The man, the apostle, the follower, who took Peter to Jesus. And if you're with any Orthodox, they're always quick to remind you that we really evangelized all of you. But again, you find that relationship with Peter in all of them. Now, from Constantinople, this church evangelized Eastern Europe. They evangelized this region. So we have Antioch evangelizing Asia, Alexandria evangelizing Africa, and Constantinople evangelizing Eastern Europe. We then cross the line into the Western Empire, and there's only one apostolic see there, Rome. And this is the place where Peter and Paul were both martyred. And it was the Western Rome that evangelized Western Europe, and all of those countries colonized by them. So that would be North and South America. We're Latin Catholic because they all arose from Rome. Now, let me go back here. Excuse me for going back and forth. So we have centers of evangelization: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Rome. 5 C's. 5 C's. They referred to them as the Pentarchy, and they sometimes said these 5 C's govern the entire church. The Orthodox would much prefer to say we have 5 patriarchates, not one as governing the entire church. Now, after the expansion, we have division. Sadly, we have division. The first division, the maps don't show it very well, but the first division, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire were always at war. Persians up here. They were always at war. So if you were a Christian in Persia, the Persians looked on you as an enemy because that meant you were aligned with this bishop of Antioch. You had a foreign power. You were suspect. So at about 410, they broke away. The Assyrian church broke away, but they were very, very active. They were the ones who continued to evangelize China and India. And then Chalcedon, in 450, there was a dispute whether Jesus had 1 or 2 natures, and the Syriac church, the Coptic church, and the Armenian church all broke away from Constantinople. This whole region broke away. This whole region broke away. Now, it had the veneer that they were talking about whether Jesus had 1 or 2 natures. And they talked about it. The real problem was it was a cultural war. It was a Semitic battle, the Semitic cultural thing. They did not want to be run by Greeks. The Alexandrians were Copts, and the Armenians had their own culture, the Armenian culture. And they felt Constantinople had nothing to offer them. It just took their money, their wheat, and their young men to fight their wars. And then there was the last division. So this is how the 3 major divisions. Then there was the last division. The Schism of 1054. Now, we if you made a movie, you'd say, okay, we have the Cardinal Umberto, the representative of the Pope, throwing an letter of excommunication on the altar of Hagia Sophia. That's dramatic. Actually, what happened was there was a gradual drifting away of the 2 churches that had been taking place for a long time. Rome and the Western Empire had gone into disarray. Nobody knew Greek there, and they just kept opposing each other in different ways. So, my friends, from 1054 to the Council of Trent, 500 years later, Catholicism was Latin Catholicism, except for the Italo-Greeks, the Maronites, and some Chaldeans in Baghdad. By and large, for 500 years, Catholicism was Latin Catholicism. So, for 1/4 of the life of the church, there were no Eastern Christians in communion with Rome or with Rome. And then what happened? After they had the Council of Trent, which didn't talk about Catholicism for one reason, there were no Eastern Catholicism for one reason. There were no Eastern Catholics. They spoke about, what happened was Trent created some orders and some congregations, missionaries, and they went out and they evangelized in countries in Egypt, in the Middle East, in Russia, and slowly small congregations of Catholics came about. And they told these Catholics, well, if you join the Catholic Church, you can still pray the way you have been, which meant that they had to have their own priest, their own bishops, and eventually their own patriarchs. What time is it? We have some time for questions. I did it in 45 minutes. I'm quite proud. So any questions? I know it was fast. I know it was fast. Think of it as expansion to 5 centers and 3 significant points of division and then partial reunions. But if you have any questions now, I probably skipped, you probably forgot what you wanted to ask. Peter, do you have a question? You have to go. Deacon Peter has to go because I think he has a billable hour waiting for him somewhere. Oh. Questions? Now, how many of you have your codes in front of you? Any of you? Anybody have an Eastern code?
I do.
Okay, who's I? Who wants to read Canon 28, paragraph 2?
I got mine. What do you want us to do with it?
28:2. Read Canon 28, paragraph 2.
The rites dealt with in this code, unless it is established otherwise, are those which arose from the Alexandrian, Antiochian, Armenian, Chaldean, and Constantinopolitan traditions.
Okay, that's the law we're going to be talking about next time, because I said these are centers of evangelization. These are where the traditions arose in Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Chaldean, Baghdad, and Armenia. These are the 5 major traditions in Eastern Catholicism. Have I managed to confuse you totally yet? Father Adonis, do you have any questions?
I am Subdeacon Adonis. I have a question.
Subdeacon Adonis, okay. We'll make you a bishop, okay. Subdeacon Adonis.
Okay, yeah, I have a question. So
Sure.
at the time before Trent and up to Trent, what did the Maronites and the other Eastern churches that eventually came part or were considered as part of the Catholic Church, what did they consider themselves at that time? Did they really consider themselves as they have loyalty to the Latins, to the Western Church, Latin Church, and
Well,
yet not Catholics?
they were what they would have considered themselves. We had only three. Well, we had the Malabars, and they were in and out. Okay, but let's just consider the Maronites, the Italo-Greeks, which are in southern Italy, and a few people in Baghdad, Chaldeans. They considered themselves as Catholics who celebrated the liturgy differently. The patriarch was simply an archbishop or a bishop with some auxiliaries. They weren't, what the big thing was, if you go to Canon 27 of the Code, it speaks about Eastern churches. That's the important thing that we keep forgetting. We are a church. The patriarch is the head of a church. We are not simply Catholics allowed to do things differently. We are a church, the Maronite Church, in communion with the Church of Rome. That is the key. We are not members of the Maronite Rite. The Rite is the way we do things. We are members of the Maronite Church. And it took us, even like you said, Subdeacon, before Trent and clear up to Vatican II, it took that long for us to realize, wait a minute, we're church. We're church. We're not simply Catholics different than Latin Catholics. Thank you for answering. That was an excellent question. Thank you. Another one. Armando, Father Armando.
Communion is a two-way street. I mean, we
Yes.
are as much in communion with Rome as much as Rome in communion with us. So it's not
Yes.
It's not a one-way street.
Exactly. Exactly.
And the idea that the Maronite Church is a rite, the first time I was introduced to it, I mean, I was born in Lebanon, that people call us a rite. I was introduced to it here in the States. But growing up in Lebanon, we've always referred to ourselves as a church and never as a rite.
Yes.
So can you comment on that?
Well, it was until Vatican II, the terms were always confused. Rite equaled church. At the Council of Trent, the term rite, R-I-T-U-S in Latin, was used in 30 different ways. And it was the job of the people that made this code to start sorting things out. We live in a church, we are members of a church, but we follow a rite that originated from one of the 5 traditions we talked about today. Yes.
If I may add something, at the beginning you talked about unity and diversity. The image that I like to use and makes sense in my head is a family, with siblings. Siblings do things similarly, but each one of them manages their household differently, and all of them belong to one family, even though each has his own family or her own family.
Very much so. Now, my family, I grew up in Pennsylvania. My family, they didn't retire there. My parents, in 1980, moved there with my brothers and sisters. Their lifestyles growing up, the way they build their houses, the way they vacation, I see my nieces and nephews, all of them are running around barefoot all the time. Well, these are things that we didn't do in Pennsylvania. So yes, if you plant it somewhere else, it's going to act differently. It's going to look differently.
And one more comment, if I may. The official name of the church is not the Maronite Church, it's the Antiochian Syriac Maronite Church, and that gives us a history of who we are. A
Right
church
there.
a church of Antioch with its Syriac root, and it developed as a Maronite church later on. And I find that interesting that in the name, in the title, Antiochian Syriac Maronite Church, it gives us this whole history.
The whole thing is right there. Subdeacon Stephen.
Yes, yeah. I believe it or not, that's the first time I've heard that we're a church, not a Maronite Rite. And I was ordained in 2010. So it hasn't been emphasized in our catechism and our history. And so I need to understand a little bit more about what that means as a church. I suspect it means that we administer and we do the liturgy, and the way we run our organization is separate from the Roman churches. But I need to understand that a little bit more.
Very good. Let me explain it to you a little bit, okay? There's a status called sui juris, which is what we're going to talk about next time. It's like I paid you guys to, lead into the next question. Sui juris status means self-governing. I can explain it like this. Young couples, when they first get married, they might have got married a little too young, so they move in with one of the parents. Okay, and really, whatever the arrangement is, either the boy or the girl is kind of living as a second-class citizen in somebody else's house. They welcome them as a son-in-law or daughter-in-law, but if it's a girl, she doesn't dare go into the kitchen and start cooking on her own. Okay. That doesn't happen until she moves into her own house. Then it becomes a household, a church that governs itself. And the thing in law, how self-governing, you elect your own leadership, you pass your own laws, and you resolve your own judicial questions. The Maronite Church, see, in the Latin Church, they can't do that. The Archdiocese of New York doesn't have those powers, even though it's much bigger than us. We have the powers. I mean, if you told people, your friends, Latin priests or deacons or deacons, that, well, no, we elect our bishops. You elect your bishops. For the Latin Church, that's absolutely unknown. Okay? We prepare our own liturgical text. We, when there's a dispute or a marriage case, we resolve it. That's what self-governing, that's what it means to be a self-governing church. Make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. Just a quick story. I went to a Roman liturgy one time, and the sacristan said, "Could you be a Eucharistic minister today? I know you're a subdeacon." And I went up, and the priest said, "No, you can't do that." He said, you're not valid as a Eucharistic minister in the Latin Church. And so I wasn't able to do it. I didn't completely understand. Later, it was explained to me, but that's a good example that even though I'm ordained and I've been given bishop permission to do Eucharistic distribution, it didn't carry into the Roman Church. So it was interesting.
He was wrong, though, because you did have the power to do it.
Ah, okay.
And you did have the power to do it from your own church. And you have the right to exercise your office wearing your vestments.
Right. Well, this was actually, I was attending a Latin liturgy. It was a weekday early morning liturgy, and there was a lot of people. So the sacristan said, "Gee, we need a Eucharistic minister." And it was just an interesting thing.
He was sincere, but he was sincerely wrong.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Okay, thanks.
Father Ronald, you got a question?
Everything was clear. Actually, I was expecting something about the relation between the Latin code and the Eastern code regarding marriage.
We'll get into all those questions.
I signed up to hear something about marriage, actually, but
if you look at the
really
questions,
interesting.
Endearment, impediments, we're going to get into all those things. But my problem is, I want to talk about the churches before we talk about how we govern ourselves. Because like people say, oh, you mean we can do these things on our own? Why can we, for example, why do we have a code? See, you don't even ask these questions because at first there was a big dispute. Maybe the Easterns don't need a code. Maybe we'll just take the Latin code and change it a little bit. That was the problem. So you want to hear marriage, and you're going to get it. That's going to be a core. But the reason why we have our own law is because we are our own church. Now, this might be evident to you, but a lot of people don't know these things. George. Is George here?
Okay, Chorbishop, I have a question, another question.
Surely.
You mentioned like the election of our own bishops.
Yes.
Our own bishops. Okay, through my experience, I mean, most of my lifetime I spent it here, in the US, so I don't know how it's done in Lebanon. But from my experience here, I know that there are 3 names
Yes.
that are suggested for an election. In a certain order, they're sent to the Pope for him to approve one of them.
Outside the territory.
This is the one, right? Oh, okay.
Outside the territory. The big thing is,
Antioch you're talking about?
no, the church in the Middle East just elects a bishop. They don't do 3 names. They just elect this one, and he's the bishop. However, they don't have jurisdiction here. They don't have the patriarch and the synod don't have that power, legislative power or executive power outside their territory. So outside the territory, they elect 3 candidates in order of preference and send it to Rome. Now, Rome then, legally, Rome has the power, then Rome makes an appointment. It could be one of those 3, or it could be anybody else they want.
So this is true in Africa, for
Yes.
Asia, or all over?
Yes,
wait.
anything outside what was traditionally the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks.
So that begs the question of the jurisdiction of the patriarch.
Yes.
And didn't Father Marini argue that jurisdiction of the patriarch can be throughout the world and not just in his historical role as the patriarch of the East? And could you elaborate on that point if I understood that correctly?
You're correct. You're absolutely correct. The issue, the patriarch and the synod, I don't like to say patriarch because it makes it sound like he's a little pope. The patriarch and the synod, their jurisdiction is limited by Vatican II to the territory, their homeland. However, Rome can extend it. The problem is we have the capacity to govern ourselves anywhere. But some of these Eastern Catholic churches, you can look at the numbers. I sent you another paper, the Eastern Catholic churches. If you have 125,000 people and you're in Egypt, and you're a patriarch, do you have the capacity to govern an international entity? Not all of the patriarchs have that capacity. Yes, it could be without any difficulty. The Pope could say immediately, you could do that. The way it's working right now, I was opposed to this system. I've been beat up because of it, but I see it's working. Any other questions?
So
really, I'm sorry, go ahead, Father.
go ahead.
So effectively, okay, we are Maronites. We are like that vine that was pulled out from France, grapevine, and then we are planted elsewhere. So really, are we pseudo-Maron?
No.
Okay, so liturgically, we still follow 100%
Precisely.
right? But logistically or administratively, we are not under that realm of the patriarchate. Is that true?
If you carry a passport, American passport, to Canada, you don't have all the rights you had when you were in the States. You get, well, you're foreign. Okay. So it is a different patriarchate. It's a different, we're in a different land. They could have made the rule, once you leave, you change. They didn't. And right now, this is working. I don't think it's good, because when we go into Orthodox, then we have another problem. Would the Orthodox accept something like that? But the Orthodox have a big problem now, because they proclaim one bishop, one territory. You have the Bulgarians, you have the Russians, you have the Serbians, all of that in the States. They're trying to create one archbishop, one synod for all of this, and the headaches they have. Well, let's call it a day, guys.